And then we're going to start the webinar. I'm going to share the PowerPoint. Perfect. Take it away, Zoha.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Zohaa Awan, and I'm a licensed graduate professional counselor at Stride Forward Counseling. Today, I'll be talking about a topic that's both deeply important and often misunderstood: beyond the mirror, understanding eating disorders and the path to healing. Today, I'll be talking about, I'll be covering a range of topics today, from myths and misconceptions to the different types of eating disorders, their connection to body image and media, and how treatment and recovery really look in practice. I'll also be going over some case studies around the end too. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them along the way. And we'll also have time at the end for a Q&A session anyway. But yeah, just to share a bit of background, I personally struggled with an eating disorder for several years without even realizing it. It wasn't until I began working as a group therapist at an eating disorder treatment center for adolescents and adults that I kind of started to recognize how much of what I was teaching my clients also applied to me. During my time there, I learned not only how unique each person's experience with an eating disorder can be, but also how many myths and misconceptions surround them. That experience was truly eye-opening and helped me begin my own journey toward healing and awareness. Currently, I work with a variety of clients at Stride Forward Counseling who struggle with body image and eating disorders, helping them through recovery. So, with that, let's start with something interactive: a quick myth or fact game to just break the ice. I'll read each statement out loud, and you can type in the chat whether you think it's a myth or a fact. So, first one: eating disorders are all about food. That is, and next, a myth. It is definitely not. There's so much more that is encompassing with that. You can tell if, next one, you can tell if someone has an eating disorder just by looking at them. What do you guys think? It is also a myth. They come in all shapes and sizes, as well as ages, and just, it's a whole variety. Next one, only those with low self-esteem develop eating disorders. Also a myth. Eating disorders are similar to addictions. That is a fact. It's like a sense of like control and things like that. So I'll get more into it as we go on. Dieting is a normal part of life. Myth. As common as it is, not really a normal part of life, actually. Control is a big component for eating disorders. That is very true. And last but not least, eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. That is a fact. And then given that, that is a big reason for why learning about this is so important. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Firstly, it's very commonly misdiagnosed. Eating disorders don't always look like what people expect. They affect all genders, sizes, and backgrounds. Because of that, a lot of people go undiagnosed or get the wrong kind of help for years with addiction or obsession. Eating disorders often act like an addiction. There's that same sense of being hooked or losing control. For some, the behaviors even trigger a dopamine release, which makes the cycle harder to break. Next, there's the chronic health complications. These disorders don't just affect mental health, they take a real toll on the body. Heart issues, digestive problems, and bone loss are all common and can sometimes last even after recovery. Then there's comorbidities. So let's start with anxiety first. Someone with social anxiety may avoid eating in public, skipping meals at work or school. The eating disorder becomes a way to manage a fear of judgment and then also creating more isolation and stress. With depression, a person with depression may binge or restrict because of a low mood, guilt, or just feelings of worthlessness. The eating disorder provides a sense of control or just temporary relief, but also worsens emotional distress long term. With OCD and an eating disorder, I actually had a client at the eating disorder clinic who had OCD and an eating disorder. His OCD made a rule for himself that he can only eat 50% of his meal. And if he realized he ate even more than just the half, he would be in physical and mental distress. Like he could not sit still, like you could see the anxiety exuding off of him as well. Eating more triggered his severe anxiety and, yeah, compulsive behaviors. The obsessive rule reinforces restriction, and the eating disorder then reinforces the OCD cycle. It's also affecting children as young as 8 years old. We're seeing younger and younger kids struggling with body image and restrictive eating. Social media and diet culture play a big role, so early awareness and support really do matter. Next slide. So let's get into the prevalence and demographics of those with eating disorders. Based on the chart, the highest prevalence is ages 16 to 20, making up roughly 43%, with ages 11 to 15 being about 33%. Ethnicity-wise, statistics show that the multiracial group make up a relatively larger part of those with eating disorders. Next, specifically being the Hispanics and Latin American cultures, as well as Asian Americans. It's also important to note that these are only reported eating disorder statistics. So, although I did have an eating disorder, my statistic isn't included in the Asian American section. Also, there is not just one type of eating disorder that all these people have, as there are quite some subtypes. Can you move to the next slide, please? So there's anorexia nervosa, restrictive eating, which is restrictive eating that leads to significantly low body weight, intense fear of gaining weight, and distorted body image. There's binge eating disorder, which is recurrent episodes of eating large quantities of food, often very rapidly and to the point of discomfort, accompanied by a sense of loss of control during the binge and marked distress afterwards. There's also bulimia nervosa, recurrent binge eating followed by compensatory behaviors, including vomiting, laxative, excessive exercise. There's also avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, better known as ARFID, a little bit on the rare-ish side, but avoidance or restriction of food not because of weight or body image, but due to sensory sensitivities, fear of negative consequences, or simply a lack of interest in eating, leading to serious health and functional problems. And then there's the other specified food or eating disorder, which is just that eating disorder behaviors causing distress or impairment, but they don't meet the entire criteria for anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating. If you look at these statistics don't look too high. However, the roughly 1% of women with anorexia translates to about 1.2 million women in the US. These numbers also don't include subthreshold eating disorders, such as atypical anorexia or purging disorder, which are actually more common. One study suggests up to 20% of adolescents show clinically significant disordered eating behaviors. If it's so common, what should we be looking out for? Next slide, please. So some signs include drastic weight changes, physical health issues. I know for women, a big thing is like sometimes they do end up losing their periods, and constant calorie counting. Some symptoms include preoccupation with thoughts of food, calories, body image, as well as an intense fear of gaining weight, and feelings of guilt or shame after eating. And some common behaviors include rigid food rules, just like in the OCD example, playing with food or hiding food, excessive exercise to compensate for eating, and then frequent body checking. Let's see. This brings us to eating disorders in the media. So let's talk about media influence, something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. One of the biggest issues is the normalization of diet culture. Things like what I eat in a day videos or clean eating trends that make it seem like there's only one right way to eat. These often promote restriction and guilt around food, especially among young audiences who are still developing their sense of self. Then there's the promotion of unrealistic beauty standards. From influencers to celebrities, we're constantly seeing curated images of perfection. These standards are not only unachievable for most people, but also constantly changing, which can make individuals feel like they're just never enough. Add to that, photo editing, filters, and even cosmetic procedures like Botox have just become so normalized. We end up comparing ourselves to images that aren't even real. This can fuel body dissatisfaction and, for some, contribute to the onset or maintenance of eating disorders. I'm going to show you a quick TikTok that shocked me when I first saw it, as it made me realize how warped our perception is of social media influencers. And you can play the video, please.
I keep getting tagged in posts that are like, name one girl that's naturally pretty. Natural. You thought this was natural? Guys, I have my nose done, my lips done, I have chin lipo, I have chin filler, I have Botox in my face, I have Botox in my traps, I have the girls done, I have lipo 360, my hair is fake, my nails are fake. I wear makeup in every single video, and if I'm not wearing makeup, I'm wearing a filter. And even if I am wearing makeup, I usually have a filter on. So there's nothing really natural here. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry, but thank you.
So going back to the slides, the key takeaway here is that social media doesn't always reflect reality, and learning to view it critically is so important for maintaining a healthy body image and self-esteem. And all of this constant exposure to diet culture, edited photos, and unrealistic ideals really ties into the next topic, body image and body dysmorphia. Because when we're surrounded by these filtered versions of reality, it can start to distort the way we see ourselves, sometimes to the point where what we see in the mirror doesn't really match how we actually look. So when we talk about body image, we're referring to how someone perceives and feels about their own body. And that perception isn't always accurate. For many people with eating disorders, this perception becomes distorted, which could then lead to something called body dysmorphia. People with body dysmorphia often fixate on certain physical flaws. Maybe it's their stomach, their face, their nose, their skin. It could be literally anything. And things that might be barely noticeable or just not noticeable at all to others. And then this can, lead to a really warped sense of self, where no matter how much they change or how much reassurance they get, they still don't see themselves clearly. The mirror almost becomes an enemy. A common behavior that goes hand in hand with this is frequent body checking. Constantly looking in the mirror, comparing body parts, or pinching certain areas to check for changes. It's a compulsive pattern that reinforces negative self-perception and anxiety. And then the cycle of fixation, distortion, and checking can be exhausting and honestly very just thought consuming, making it really hard for people to focus on anything else or feel comfortable in their own skin. So as we can see, eating disorders really impact both the mind and the body. It's not just about food or appearance, but about control, emotional regulation, and self-perception. Because of that, treatment has to be just as comprehensive. Next slide, please. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Recovery often requires both medical and psychological support. Therapeutically, we often use approaches like cognitive behavior therapy to challenge distorted thoughts around food and body image. We use dialectical behavior therapy to help with emotional regulation and impulse control. Group therapy for connection and accountability, and even exposure therapy to slowly face food-related fears. Most people benefit from a treatment team, which usually includes a therapist, a dietitian or nutritionist, a psychiatrist, and a primary care provider to monitor vitals and physical health. And depending on the severity of the eating disorder, there are actually different levels of care, starting from least amount of care to most, outpatient therapy. That's just like having a regular therapist, basically. Then there's intensive outpatient programs, which is maybe a few times a week you go in the evening to have dinner with other people in the treatment, and that's still monitored. Then there's partial hospitalization, which is where I had worked, where they're coming in from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. They're having 3 meals and 2 snacks, and it's full of like group therapy, dietitian sessions, all that type of stuff. But then at the end of the day, they do end up going home. And they're technically supposed to also do evening snack too, but that's kind of up to them. And then the next level of care would be residential care. That's where, yeah, you're kind of just staying there day and night. Usually that's kind of a few month situation. And then lastly is the inpatient hospitalization. And that usually ends up with people being like getting IV tubes and everything because they're that low in their they're very malnourished. And then even with all these resources, recovery can be incredibly challenging. And that's where the role of support systems becomes so important. Next slide, please. How can you support a loved one going through this? Firstly, listen without judgment. Allow them to express fears, thoughts, and struggles freely. But also avoid offering unsolicited advice or criticism. Just validate their feelings instead. You should also encourage professional help. Suggest therapy, nutritional counseling, or medical evaluation in a gentle, supportive way. Normalize seeking help by emphasizing that recovery is possible. Next, avoid focusing on weight or appearance specifically. Compliments or comments about body size can unintentionally reinforce eating disorder behaviors. Focus on achievements, effort, or personal qualities instead. Also, just educate yourself. Learn about the different eating disorder types, comorbidities, and warning signs. Understanding reduces frustration and helps you respond with empathy rather than judgment. And that's why you're here, is to educate yourself. So then there is being patient and consistent. Recovery often includes setbacks. Avoid expressing disappointment or anger. Celebrate small wins and maintain supportive presence over time. Last but not least, please make sure you set your healthy boundaries. You can be supportive without sacrificing your own mental health. Be clear about what you can and cannot do. Avoid enabling harmful behaviors. If you start to realize that, some of this person's, like your loved one's behaviors or actions, they're starting to trigger you a little bit, maybe take a little bit of that space for yourself too and recognize what are these feelings that you're having. Next slide, please. So I wanted to discuss a few case studies to start to conclude this presentation. Of course, all patient identifying information is not included. The first case study will be referring back to that former client with OCD, whose compulsions became tightly connected to food and eating. He believed he could only eat exactly 50% of any meal. Anything more would send him into intense physical and emotional distress, as mentioned before. He also had rituals, like brushing his teeth right before meals to avoid enjoying the food. This basically creates an aversion, so he wouldn't want to eat again. One example that really stood out to me was with chocolate-covered almonds. For some reason, he would only eat the chocolate coating, because he believed that meant he ate 50% of the snack. He refused to eat the actual almond because he saw it as the other half, even though that logic didn't actually make sense. But this is a perfect illustration of how OCD rules don't have to be logical. They just have to reduce anxiety. Treatment for him required a mix of exposure therapy, interrupting rituals, and addressing both the OCD patterns and the eating disorder behaviors at the same time. Next one. This next case focuses on a 22-year-old Muslim woman whose restrictive eating got much worse during Ramadan, which is the holy month of fasting. She genuinely wanted to practice her faith, but her eating disorder used fasting as a way to justify even more restriction. She would fast all day, but at iftar time, which is the sunset time to break fast, she would barely eat, just small, safe foods, and felt intense guilt for not doing Ramadan the right way. Meanwhile, her body was struggling. Dizziness, fainting spells, extreme fatigue. This is a common pattern. Eating disorder behaviors hiding under the umbrella of religious devotion. A really important moment in her care was involving faith and religion, emphasizing that in Islam, anyone who is ill is exempt from fasting. Her health was not a spiritual failure, it was a priority. This collaboration helped her stay connected to her faith while also taking care of her body. Next, There is a 15-year-old Jewish girl who struggled with restricting and purging for years. Even though she was severely ill, she constantly felt like she was not sick enough to deserve treatment, which is something we actually see commonly in the Jewish community. During treatment, she would try to convince staff to let her use the bathroom after meals to purge or throw up. And when she wasn't allowed, she would go into extreme distress, running out of the building or threatening self-harm. She ended up needing multiple rounds of residential and inpatient treatment because the behaviors were so ingrained. Part of what made this case so complicated was how cultural themes like guilt and self-denial and high expectations fed into the eating disorder mindset. The biggest takeaway is that this wasn't about attention or rebellion. It was a deeply entrenched cycle of guilt and control. Helping her separate her cultural values from the eating disorder voice was essential for her progress. The last one I discuss is one that may be a bit overlooked in the real world, the gym bro mentality. This case is about a 28-year-old man who looked like the picture of discipline, tracking every macro, calorie, protein, everything, working out daily, eating clean. But underneath all that, he was struggling with muscle dysmorphia. Anytime he missed a workout or ate something off plan, he felt intense guilt or panic, felt that everything was messed up. He would also avoid eating around friends or going to social events. He'd rather eat whatever he meal prepped or planned or whatever, as opposed to allowing himself to enjoy other stuff. He was constantly checking mirrors, comparing himself to fitness influencers, and never feeling muscular enough, no matter how he actually looked. In fitness spaces, this kind of behavior gets praised, which can make it even harder to recognize that this is an eating disorder. Recovery involves challenging those rigid food rules, reducing compulsive exercise, and addressing this distorted body image driving everything. This case is such a good reminder that eating disorders don't always look like thinness. Sometimes they look like overexercise and obsession with muscle. Next slide. To end off, here is a fun fact. Does anyone know what this symbol is? This is the National Eating Disorder Awareness symbol. The shorter line is often interpreted as representing the eating disorder itself. The longer line symbolizes the strength, courage, and resilience one possesses to overcome the disorder and achieve recovery. The combination of the lines into a heart shape signifies self-respect, acceptance, and love, while the fluid, abstract shape can also represent the diverse curves of the body, promoting acceptance of all body shapes and sizes. And those are my resources, and that's pretty much it. Are there any questions? You can put them in the chat.
Okay, we have a question.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you. I have a question, and
Sure.
feel free to keep rolling them in as they come. So, if we wanted to learn a little bit more about eating disorders, do you have any book recommendations to give us to read on our own or learn? Maybe this piqued our interest of like, oh, maybe I do have something I could work on. What would be some good books?
Yeah. One book that I always recommend is called Goodbye, Ed. Hello, Me. Ed being the eating disorder. This is a self-help book where Jenny, the author, talks about how she learned to see her eating disorder as its own separate voice and slowly quiet it through self-compassion and healthier thinking. She gives really practical tools and exercises that help people challenge that eating mindset and start building a more compassionate and grounded relationship with food and themselves.
We have some
And
more
then,
questions.
yeah, I see that Lily, you asked readings on how to support loved ones with eating disorders. So I have a book for that too. So another one that I recommend in regards to that is called Surviving an Eating Disorder. That is by Michelle Siegel, I believe. as that helps with strategies for friends and family members to support those struggling with an eating disorder. And then, have you had any experiences with people with RFID? I'm struggling with it and it feels like there's not a lot of advice. I can find ways I can get around it. On food stamps, okay. I think with RFID, I've had a few with RFID back at my eating disorder clinic. And I think that one, it's definitely a little bit more on the difficult side in the sense of it's different than how we treat it because it's not entirely body image related. It's a lot of it honestly has to do with exposure therapy and support. I think that trying out the foods that you're not entirely into, whether if it is related to like the textures and things like that, it's just even taking one or two bites. Having a support person with you to be there and be like, hey, let's try this out. If you don't end up liking it, I give it 3 to 4 times trying it out and then seeing how that goes. After the fourth time, you're like, yeah, this is still not it. That's okay too, because that's our palate. Like we're not meant to like everything, you know?
Thank you.
Book recommendations for those who struggle with body image. There's definitely a lot of those. I have to, let me think. I may have to get back to you on that one, just because a lot of the book recommendations I have are straight just eating disorder itself. But I know there's a whole lot out there with body image too.
And anyone that joined today, we can send out some book recommendations at the end to further along with some resources. So I know you worked at a place before. Which one was it called? Where you were in?
Eating Recovery Center in
Yes.
Bethesda.
Yeah. Do you have like how does someone know what level of care they should go to, and how would they find that?
So I think everyone kind of they start there with a lot of people that I saw, they started with an intensive outpatient because you're there for a reason. You're not going to completely start with just outpatient. So you start at the highest level, or the lowest level of care in a way. And then they see how you're doing in that group setting. If they realize, okay, this person may need a little bit more help, then they go transfer over to PHP. With PHP, which is partial hospitalization program, that's the one where, yeah, they're there for every single day, even weekends, depending on the company. I know Eating Recovery Center did do weekends, but as intensive as that is, it does kind of that it does help you realize where you're at. Some people graduate within a month once they meet their maintenance weight or they're mentally feeling a bit better about the eating disorder itself. That is, then they're able to move. But if they're still not eating so much and they're still just, more on the resistant side, then they either end up staying there a lot longer. I know a few people that stay there for 5, 6 months, which is a little bit extensive, but then they would end up, yeah, if still no progress from there, they move down to residential.
Okay. Then for clients who are struggling with binge eating, who are not fully open to higher level of care, other than outpatient, do you recommend therapists to focus on the control aspect and shame, or are there other tips for stopping binge eating that is needed, that is really needed for higher level of care?
That's a really good question. I think with that, there's quite a few people that do struggle with binge eating and they don't really want to go into those higher levels of care just because it is scary. Because one, you might not know anyone who's been through it, but two, it's just like it's a new experience and this is a very scary thing for them. But I do think that the therapist should focus on a part of the control aspect and shame, but maybe finding different ways to be like, okay, how can we try to, whether it is with, what is it called? Like meal prepping or like kind of finding different ways of support in general of, sometimes maybe they need different timings for it, kind of setting like a little, not food rules specifically, but some rules for them could be helpful. See if that works. If you realize maybe that this is making it potentially worse, I do think that the people that do need that higher level of care, I think that definitely getting set up with a nutritionist is also helpful because then they get the scientific aspect. That's what I've heard is that a few of my clients, they prefer, like, it's good for them to also have a nutritionist too because they get the scientific aspect as opposed to just the talking about feelings. And I think once you're able to, get the ROIs and everything, you can collaborate on care. And I think that that is the best way to work with just eating disorders in general.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyone you know of for referral for nutritionist? I know I have some. I can send them out to the group, but
I have some as well. I know you can definitely look at, I think Nourish is the one that accepts a lot of insurances. That's just like a website where you can find people. But at the same time, it's like there's specific people I can definitely send emails of them. I have a whole referral list for that as well.
okay, great. We'll put together those extra resources for everyone that attended and send them out. Um, Thank you, Zoha, for presenting. That was so informative and lovely. And thank you all for coming and attending. Again, we recorded this, so if you came late or you missed any of it, we will be sending it out, the extra resources at the end, the recording, and just anything else. You can contact us. If you need a certain resource, we can get back to you with that. Okay?
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, and everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening and a good week.
Bye.